Okay, we are live. I'm so happy. Oh, and I meant to add a thingy here. Let's see if I can do that now and if it can update. I'm curious to see. We'll find out. I meant to do this before I launch the live stream, but I think maybe I can only do it after. So how might I do it? Oh yeah, I want to go to the calendar. Welcome, welcome. So glad you're here. So glad people are joining. This is so great. If you've joined, I'm not checking the current piece because I'm doing something else at the moment. If you're joining this session, you are welcome. Either in real time, feel free to write hashtag live and share where you are joining in from and what inspired you to join today's session. If you don't know what the session is about yet, today we are doing a live. I'm doing a series around some key foundational and consequential insights around collective liberation. And today I'm going to be covering who does oppression really hurt and how? And some of it may be familiar and some of it may be less familiar and a little, as one of my colleagues would say, spicy. So let's get that going. Let's see here. All right. Joyous Justice Insight Lab live session. Okay. We've updated that. I'm going to give people a couple more minutes to join. Let's see. Oh, yeah, and I wanted to try, this might be a little much, but I wanted to try also doing, although it's blocked. Okay, I'm going to have to turn off the block. That's complicated. Because I'm just going to have to change it to 11. Stop session. That's what I need to do. No, I need to stop session. Okay, and then that frees me up. Let me. Thank you for sharing. Whew. Scared me. Okay. Okay, one or more of the platforms dropped. I'm assuming that's LinkedIn. And maybe it's just going to take me a moment, but right now it seems like they have a pain in the tush. That is not the best angle. Hoops to jump through in order to do live. That was an interesting sound. Okay. I don't like that look. Okay, that's a little better. Okay, as far as that goes. Okay, maybe I just need to take my phone out of its case. There we go. Who does oppression really hurt? All right, maybe I'll just do that separately. No need to try to do too many things all at once. All right, I'm curious how you're doing. We're 5 minutes past, so let's go ahead and get started. Wait, actually, I think I can just pop this back in probably. Let's see. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to go over some baseline pieces here, which are really essential, and then also add in some additional depth and nuance. Today, I want to look at who does oppression really hurt and how? In some ways, there's a certain amount of this that's really known and understood, and for others, and for many, there's still other dimensions of this that aren't seen as ideally as holistically as would be beneficial for us to understand. So, in a different but similar kind of way to how many people are lamenting about how divided and siloed we are, there's a way that for whatever reason, and there are specific reasons, primarily a chronic and tremendous lack of resourcing around healing. It's hard for us for many to get access to and be able to hold the full extent of the impact and harm of oppression. Um, and yet, so we need to do this mindfully and gently and thoughtfully. And also, we still need to do it because if we do not have accurate perception of the terrain we are navigating and what that terrain requires of us in order to effectively engage in transformation, in service of collective liberation and justice. And you don't have to be a super justicey person to be in this space. So though it's hard to imagine someone just oh my goodness, wait, there's chat happening. Wait, what's the chat? Studio chat. So sorry, y'all. How do I? Okay, here we go. Public chat. I don't know what that other thing is. That's weird. Okay. Okay, it's just me. Okay, it's just the automatic thing. Whew. I thought I'd missed something. I'm going to have to create a little checklist for myself and SOP here to make sure I hit all the points. Shout out to the physician. I believe his name is Atul Gawande, for his wonderful book about checklists and their immense value. So where was I? I was saying that this is an issue that truly affects everyone, and it's actually the very result of oppression that it's a direct result of oppression that people think that they are or aren't into social justice and political education when it's something that truly affects our lives. And this makes sense, and I don't blame the people for this. It's because of the conditioning we've gotten where we think that collective liberation and or specifically engaging in counter oppression, and this is why going through these definitions is so important, is just for the oppressed. And that it's just for people who have bleeding hearts and who are super into justice. But what people don't realize is because systemic oppression is in fact systemic and so pervasive. Everybody's calling me right now. Y'all, I'm getting a call from the pharmacy. Okay, I'm going to pause for 1 second. Please pardon me. I'll be right. Of course, I got a call right as another person is joining. Thank you so much for joining. The lesson is already underway. You are welcome to say hi in the chat and let us know who you are, whether you are a guest or a member of my team. I'm happy to know and welcome. Also, if you want to take a moment and share how you're feeling arriving on the call, all vibes welcome. I was just starting to talk about I was giving some of the framing around what we're going to be talking about today. And I was specifically talking about how collective liberation and working to counter oppression is framed as this social justice cause. And it's really inherently significant in terms of all of us having a better quality of life in really profound ways. And most of the major sources of suffering that everyone is experiencing in our society is profoundly tied to systemic oppression. And so in some ways I'm kind of saying the obvious, but I'm trying to speak to a sort of reframe that we have access to here around normalizing these conversations. I have a desire, let me say it this way, to normalize these conversations and to not just work with social justice activists and people who this is their bread and butter. There are many people who, for whatever reason, because of their conditioning, circumstance, don't see themselves as so tied to social justice and yet want a better world for their community and for the world writ large, for children all over the world, for people all around. Hey, Dean. I'm so glad. So glad you're here. Right now, it's just the two of us. More folks may join. We had a number of folks yesterday, and we'll see. And maybe people will catch this replay. So if you do catch this replay, feel free to write #replay, share your thoughts, because this episode is really significant. Ooh, and I have some spicy stuff to share that I'm curious what you think about this, Dean. I'm going to go over some basics, some baseline pieces, and then in part, just to make it more interesting, I want to add in some additional flair and generative agitation. Not that we're going to close the loop. Anyone who's listening to this will be like, oh, yeah, that totally makes sense, though you might, but because I think it's important. What I spoke about earlier on the call, welcome, welcome. Whoever else is joining, I hope y'all are joining because this is when you were able to join and not because the live stream was delayed. If so, I'm sorry. I've been going live since about 2 minutes past the hour. So if there was a glitch there, I apologize. Feel free to share your name and where you're calling in from and how you're feeling and arriving. All vibes welcome. So today I want to talk about who does oppression really hurt? And what did I say here? And how? Whatever else I said. Let's see. Yeah, who does oppression really hurt and how? And also then I want to take it farther. So train of thought here, because other people may catch the recording. So let me continue with where I was going. Oh yeah, that this is something that affects everyone. And the more people can start to understand this. And so I'm interested in, as I'm able to, and as I have attention to, and in part, that's why with Joyous Justice, also it's Joyous Justice is like in the name. So there's that. But as I'm looking at beginning to at least temporarily endeavor to be prolific in my social media content, not necessarily emphasizing that, because it becomes this kind of litmus test or barrier for certain folks when there are a lot of people. So at times that's why I describe my ideal client avatar, to get into a little bit of business speak, as kind-hearted leaders and professionals. Because some of those people may specifically connect to wanting to engage in social justice and counter oppression, and others may not for any number of reasons. And yet, if you were to talk to them about what keeps them up at night, what they care about, what their greatest hopes and aspirations are for this world and for their lives, almost always, whether or not they identify it as such, it has major themes of social justice. And part of the challenge has been, and one of the things I want to talk about, which is a little bit of a tangent, but related to everything we're talking about here, is I'm interested in this idea that's going to be foreign to a number of people, and I really want to introduce it, of nearly every challenge that many dedicated, committed, highly accomplished leaders and professionals are experiencing: burnout, overcommitment, challenges with boundaries, fatigue, the like, are tied to what I would refer to as fragmentation and an impact of various forms of systemic oppression. So I'm hitting different parts of the circle, and I'm about to go back to some of the foundational pieces and then move into some of the more advanced content. And all of this, in part one, it's good in and of itself to check in about this, and for people for whom this is new, to learn, and also for people for whom this is not new. I always find as a practitioner, it's fun to hear how other practitioners speak about these themes. And then on Monday, I'm so excited. I want to up the ante. It's one of those things where I'm sure I'm not the only one who's thought about this, but I cannot find any other place where this has been spoken about. This insight that I'm really eager to share, and about part of how systemic oppression operates that I think many people aren't aware of, that when they become aware of it, it can really help them make significant strides in their life and in their work and leadership in the world. So this is also a build up to that. So fun. Okay. So, yeah, so I was speaking to, I think right now, because they didn't heavily market this and go into a whole big campaign because ain't nobody got time for that. And also, some broader context here is for various reasons, for multiple reasons. I won't get into the full story here. I have largely been silent online. And so, as I'm finally on the other side of massive transformation around my identity, my Afro-Indigenous coming home work, my Kohenet Jewish priestess ordination. For 2 years, I was 2.5 years ish. I went radio silent. I wasn't fully clear why, but my intuition was like, now is not the time to be out and online. And I think it was because doing that work um, shifted things to the core of my identity. And there was a lot of reintegration I needed to do. And then in doing that reintegration, and as I got more whole, there was actually more brokenness, more shavira, more brokenness that I needed to face in my life that I hadn't seen before because there were such harder challenges before. It's been a lot of work, y'all. But I'm on the other side of that. And in a number of ways, I am pushing myself without everything being perfect to just go live, share my knowledge, break through this wall that I've had, and come through. So that's a part of what this live streaming series is about that I'm piloting, and I want to continue this. Another reason why I'm doing this live streaming series is because there's all kinds of things in time that I want to be talking about on social media and on the podcast, but I'm aware that a number of people don't have a similar or the same. Sometimes they have a similar, but they don't have the same kind of foundational bedrock of knowledge and understanding about some of the core pillars of Joyce Justice's work. Some of those being, I'm not going to try to name them all, around liberatory leadership, sacred wisdom, healing and inspired resilience, conflict and repair, and social justice / collective liberation. Okay. Enough of all of that. Let's start to move into what I want to talk about today. So I want to go over some Oppression 101 insights, and then, but even still, it's from a more holistic perspective than is often shared. And people missing some of these insights and having a chance to use the liberatory consciousness model that we covered yesterday to not only become aware of it, but then wrestle with it. Dean and I were just talking about this the other day. Wrestle with it and then move into accountability and allyship and then action around these things. And sometimes that accountability and allyship is self-accountability and reaching for allies for us. If it's a place where we have been targeted, or even if it's a place where we are in the privileged oppressor non-target position, for reasons I'll get into in a little bit, we need allies too. And all of us, okay, I'm getting ahead. So let's just get into the lesson here. So let me see if I can pull up the resource I wanted to reference here and pull from. Where am I going to find it? Let's see here. Y'all, I don't know what I would do without the tab search feature. It is such a blessing in my life. I might have to pull it up again. Let's go to Google Drive. Oh, it's right here. Okay, great. So open with Google Docs. Okay, so I'm not going to share screen, but I'm going to copy paste some different pieces. So, oh, and the formatting's all weird. Great. So many alarms. Oh yeah, I can copy paste from here. Great. Okay, so let's go over this. Let's get into the oppression overview and then let's build from there. So what is oppression? Or what are some key facets of oppression? There are three top pieces that I would, or three core initial pieces that I always talk about when teaching about oppression that I'll go over here. Welcome folks who have joined. Feel free to share your name and where you're joining from. And if you want to share how you're arriving, all vibes welcome, how you're feeling as you're arriving, or anything else you want to share, feel free to put it in the chat. Or if you have any thoughts, feel free to engage in the chat. Okay, so so some of the pieces here are historical, over time, ongoing, systemic targeting of certain groups as less than or inferior. It's supported by institutions institutionally in policies, laws, and representation in top-level decision makers. And also a really key feature here is that it has personal costs to everyone. This is in the chat for those who are here, and I will share that again one more time so you can reference it. So oppression is about targeting, and it's not just about, so it's about power imbalance and dehumanization, which is really central, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. And also the fact that, let's see, power imbalance, and that it also is structural. It also has interpersonal and internalized pieces that are extremely consequential and significant. But the difference between, say, like just bigotry or mistreatment that doesn't rise to the level of oppression is that it is also backed by institutional power, and not just institutional power, but institutional power over time, often over generations, over an extended period of time, where people are targeted for destruction and dehumanization, destruction / exploitation, and at times a little bit of both, or a lot of both. Right, so exploitation in the case of, right now, classism and racialized capitalism in our society, and historically over over the past recent centuries, in not all, but in many societies, particularly in Europe and the US, and countries who look to mirror those systems because they are the most powerful in the world, structurally, and not because of any innate inherent brilliance or goodness, but because as a result, unfortunately, of this systemic oppression and this systemic targeting for destruction and exploitation. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so I will continue on. And so then the next piece here that's really key, that we really want to highlight, is personal costs to everyone. And this is the part that I want to highlight, that I might, I think I'm going to try to risk being a little extra. Oh, wait, how do I click it again? There we go. A little spicy. One of my former colleagues at a prior job used to describe my work like salsa. And she's like, I don't want to be offensive, April, which, that always gives us a little pause. But she was so lovely, and I'm pretty receptive and pretty flexible around a lot of things. I've been through a lot in my life and done an abnormal amount of healing work to recover from that harm. And anyway, but what she said was absolutely lovely. And she was like, I think of your work like salsa. Like, it has different degrees. Like, some of it's mild, some of it's medium, some of it's more intense, and it's spicy. So what I'm covering now, I guess, is mild to medium, depending upon how you're entering and where you're entering the conversation. And we're all entering from different places. And I'm going to get to stuff that I think, in light of where current awareness is a bit spicy, which I wasn't planning on talking about, but to up the ante a little bit, and to, in service of trying to advance us, be a little bit more generatively agitational, I want to start to go there, but I will do so mindfully. So back to personal costs for everyone. So in the context of oppression, so a core feature of oppression, besides the imbalance of power and exploitation and destruction, where there is a targeted group and a non-targeted group by the oppression. So there's that dynamic of the power imbalance and what I just said. I'm repeating myself. And also another key feature here, foundationally, about dehumanization that ties to the personal cost for everyone, is dehumanization. is oppression is dehumanizing, and it is dehumanizing for everyone who is implicated and present in in an oppressive context. Oppression goes against the fundamental uh, goes against fundamental human nature. For humans as a mammalian species that is a part of this world and the natural world to be interconnected with the world around us, to be in harmony with the world around us. We are inherently a social species. We are meant to be deeply interconnected, to live in communities where there are many lines of interaction and connection and multiple ways that our needs and identities are getting met and expressed. And one of the key metaphors that I think of that is not the only facet of colonization, but that is on my mind a lot lately in terms of in terms of um, climate change as well as systemic oppression is the metaphor I really love is monocropping. I mean, there's lots of different things I could point to. Oh, y'all, I need to plug my phone in. Plug my laptop, charge my laptop. Woo. Where it seems like this neutral thing, but it is actually quite violent to an ecosystem where you completely shift the nature and the natural flow of the ecosystem and prioritize one identity, or in this case, one crop that is inherently unsustainable for that ecosystem, the soil, etc., and just plant rows of it, and it creates destabilization and fragmentation in ecosystems, which is causes the need, as some of you may know, for fertilizer and all these additional things. You could liken that to the way that colonization and systemic oppression has set up our world and our societies. We have needs for a whole, which is a whole longer thing, and that has some spice to it, for a whole mental health industry. One of my friend tours recently said the other day in a class we were teaching that she likened it to a metaphor of water. Oh, yes, great. Okay. So let me get back to that. I'll get back on track. Thank you. I'm going to pick up with this question that was just asked. Yes, absolutely, I do. So do I have an example for a cost for the oppressors and privileged? Yes, absolutely. So yes, thank you. There's so much I want to teach, and I'm just like, oh, thank you. Thank you. Please feel free to ask any of these kinds of questions. Absolutely, yes. So it's dehumanizing for everyone. So there's multiple examples. So one thing I can think of is that amazing segment when Professor Joy DeGruy is teaching this class. I have this as a part of my core curriculum. It's like I think it's a 2-hour session from around maybe 2008, where she was teaching a class in, I think, England. And she shows an image to mental health professionals, and she shows an image of a Black man. This is re-stimulating. So, of a Black man being horrifically lynched. And in the photo, there's a little girl, and I think either has a dog near her. She's like holding her teddy bear, and she's smiling. Right. Going back to some of what I shared yesterday, I believe that people are inherently good. So one interpretation of that might be that white people are evil, and for a certain kind of reason, and I believe in general that there are no human enemies and that people are inherently good. And also, I have this belief that evil / the devil, when people talk about, like, especially when like Christian Southern folks and Black folks say like, "Ooh, the devil did that," or "That was the devil," I've begun to notice that almost always you can substitute the devil for unhealed harm, and it works almost every time. Or I haven't seen a time where it doesn't work. There probably is one. Unhealed harm. So that is profound. Like the fact that this little girl does not have access to her humanity, that she has experienced and witnessed this so often, as Professor DeGruy says, like if that were a puppy that were getting lynched, she would be in tears. If it were her sibling, she would be an absolute wreck, as she should be. but she's smiling. So that's one facet of the harm, like not able to feel anything for that man in that horrific moment. That is indicative of a profound level of harm and dehumanization that child and everyone in that space is also a part of. Let's continue on. Additionally, there's often conditioning for people who are in, there's often at times lighter, but sometimes actually quite significant amount of oppression that people in the oppressor and privileged and non-target positions experience, either have experienced ancestrally that never got addressed, and or my favorite example I always like to talk about is men and boys and the immense dehumanization that boys go through in colonized societies, the fraction of feelings that they are permitted to feel traditionally, and a number of people working to counter this, but by and large, this is still true. The profound dehumanization that little boys go through is absolutely central to positioning men to be in an oppressor role throughout their lives. The fact that young men are sent to war 10 plus years before their brain has fully developed and are exposed, and not that in various societies or contexts women don't go to, but specifically men and young boys are positioned for so much harm that is, and dehumanization that often is invisibilized, and that sets them up to be in a position of feeling entitled. So it sets up a feeling of entitlement when they're given power, because there's this sense of needing something, and they actually truly do need something. They need healing and repair from the harm that they endured, to be witnessed around the shameful and horrific things, literally, that they experienced. And in the absence of that, even though it's not actually true, but it's experienced as such, of taking on different elements of the oppressor role, consciously or not, ends up being some kind of consolation prize. Okay, great. So, uh, oops, was wrong one. I meant to share this one. Yeah, I'm so glad that was helpful. Right. So, and there's many other examples of this kind of thing. A simpler example that you could give is that because children's oppression is so intense in so many different ways, and becoming again more visible, but largely is invisible, and is just, again, is so problematic. It sets up often elder siblings to become their younger siblings' bully. Like they may also mentor them in different ways. And I've been looking at this recently. Like overall, I was a very protective sister, but I had unhealed harm as a kid, and I definitely took it on my brother. And I felt as a kid, I wasn't intentionally, I mean, I was kind of intentionally trying to hurt him. Thankfully, this was only a few episodes over a couple years, a few years, if I'm being honest. But again, like we could think about these things. And so this is one facet that, to jump ahead, that we in our movements and in our society need to look at more, is in addition to rectifying the oppression of those who are targeted, because that is obviously and forever a top priority, we also need to bump up how we are resourcing people, not at the expense, it's not a zero sum game, not at the expense of targeted groups, but similar to love, let's push into that abundance. Resource people around their oppressor patterns. So this is something that I have been working on as a Jew over the last couple years, in community and in partnership with Palestinian and Arab partners, around looking at the ways as an American, specifically as a member of the US empire, that I and others have lots of programming around having a dehumanized perception of people from West Asia, of Arab people, and around anti-Arab oppression. Another area around my oppressor material that I continue to work on is my U.S. internalized imperialism, and the ways that the U.S. in its dehumanization positions me to focus on the ways I'm heavily impacted by racism and sexism and all of those things. It's an and get to be true. And I get to still fight for those things. And also notice, which initially when I was told about this, I felt a resistance to looking at this around the oppression I'd experienced, but it's not an either or. This is what is essential about this. It's not an either or, it's a both and. And after a while, I think it took me a while to remember, oh, you know what? I didn't have the words for this, but I was concerned about this as a kid. There's actually kind of an intense story that I don't think is best to share in a live stream, but like this is something that bothered me throughout my childhood when I became aware of slave labor and sweatshops. There was a while where I wanted to just wear like bags or something as a kid. And as I got older, I became more aware in high school and was extremely practically and I suppose existentially really devastated about what I didn't have the word American imperialism yet or imperialism, but I was disgusted when I began thinking about, because of the society I'd lived in, what I'd been complicit in. But when I first encountered hearing about that, the only reason why I could even listen to the person talking about it is because they were also a person of the global majority, a South Asian Jew who is a friend and a friendtor of mine named Milana. And because it was coming from her and I knew she had exceptional analysis, I could stay in the room. It was still hard, but I was like, I trust this person. And I know she knows about racism and I know she knows about sexism. I know she knows about these things and has really phenomenal analysis around this. So she's not discounting those. Right. And so this is part of what I want to talk about. And so often I skipped ahead and I'm kind of going to some more of the advanced notes. So it's worth naming here. Let me go over some of the additional basics and then where am I on time? Okay, good. I still have enough time to get to some of more of the meat of this. So let me cover a couple more basics here that I usually cover. And maybe I haven't tried sharing screen yet on this platform, so I'm a little reluctant to do it, but should be able to. Let's do, okay. So yeah, so in terms of the target people, and so I'm going to use so you can use different phrases. I use the phrase target and non-target. Other words you could use are oppressed and oppressor. You could also use, yeah, different labels. So the most neutral label I can come up with is target and non-target. But as you just heard me say, the non-target groups also experience a tremendous amount of harm. So they aren't institutionally, but they are, but they still experience, they are institutionally targeted, but it's just invisible in a different kind of way. And because they get other privileges, it kind of hides that harm. It kind of covers it, it shrouds it, but that harm is still there. That harm is still there. And as I shared yesterday, and something that I talk about in my Grounded and Growing program, people have this misnomer in the context of our oppressive society that time heals all wounds, but time is a benign construct and time does nothing. What does or doesn't happen within time can heal wounds, can shroud over them, can exacerbate wounds. Healing can heal all wounds, not time. And so, but people have this belief, so then they think that they're healed. So that also, that sets people up to further be entrenched in their oppressor patterns because they're often not even fully aware or aware of the harm that they're carrying. Like, I still think I am not fully aware because I am a bit, because I had the blessing of living in Senegal, though I already had so much conditioning of understanding the full extent of the harm that I have experienced growing up within the US empire. Okay, so let's go over some of these basic elements here. Okay, so we got target. Elements of the target group are dynamic, statistically less likely to succeed because of the structural oppression, deprived systemically of benefits, devalued, seen as deviant from the norm, bunny ears norm, and undeserving, segregated and stigmatized as inferior. These are attributes of and I could say people who are targeted, but what I would say is facets of our living that are targeted, because all people over the course of their life, and most often simultaneously, and some have more and less, and that is consequential, have parts of our living where we are in target and non-target groups. And so if we want to become more sophisticated in our oppression analysis, not all at once, but steadily over time, we want to give attention and resource to both of those things, because for the reasons we just said, there is work to do there that isn't just about relinquishing power. There's healing that's needed in order that can act. There's healing that's needed that likely to some extent, not doesn't need to be full healing, but needs to precede movement and transformation. Because as we talk about in Grounded and Growing in the Shema framework, there's a reason why the E comes before the A, and not just because it's a great word that I love from my religious and spiritual and cultural tradition. But in the context, it worked well for what I'd come to realize about the nature of human experience from a more decolonized, rehumanized, holistic, and less fragmented perspective. That was the tangent I was going to go on before, but I'll save it for later, because I'm planning on diving in deep on this on TikTok and Instagram in the next couple weeks. But one of the impacts of systemic oppression that is not talked about enough is fragmentation. And it's a fractal dynamic. We see it at the instant. We see it within medicine, all this fragmentation of different fields. But it also happens in our minds and in our beings. We talk about different fragments of different parts of ourselves and integrating them, but that is a facet of it. That's true. But also this happens around spirituality versus logic, emotions versus our mind. All of these things in nature, it's like an ecosystem. They exist. They're not all blended, but they have their place and they are interconnected and flowing. And I've come to realize that a huge part of what undermines our power is that we are not conscious and aware of all of this fragmentation. And part of what we do in Grounded and Growing, and through using the Shema process repeatedly around a number of different things, is reintegrate and reconnect address these different pieces in a way that helps them reconnect, so that you get a positive feedback loop where you're continually building from strength to strength and elevating or deepening in your purpose and conviction and power. But back on track, or I'm not even sure where we were. There's so many different parts of this. Okay. So let me get to the non-target group. Okay. So okay. Let's move this to the live section so I can more easily toggle. Let's move this to the live training tab. Oh, I see it was actually in the same browser all along. Okay, that's fine. So for the non-target group, okay, core elements of that experience for people in certain parts of their living who are in the non-target group, and there's ways where it's more or less significant. We don't have time to get into all of that nuance now. But it all does matter, and it's helpful the more we can account for it more holistically. Okay. So we have the non-target group, the oppressor group, the privileged group. What are facets of that experience? Statistically more likely to succeed because of all the structural benefit, not because of any inherent superiority or supremacy. Unearned benefits and privilege, valued, seen as normal, deserving and entitled, deserving of these of these benefits and good treatment and humanity, and also included in decisions and societal benefits. And as I noted, also recipients of substantial harm, almost always, because the very nature of oppression is destruction and harm and dehumanization and fragmentation and fracturing ecosystem, fracturing relationships, fracturing access to parts of our thinking, fracturing fields of knowledge. I could go on and on and on and on about all the ways that it fractures things. And I don't want you to feel overwhelmed about this because, I mean, well, you can feel overwhelmed in general about like, oh my gosh, the scale of this, but also because this is what I have dedicated years and culminated years of work in my leadership and specifically within Joyous Justice to figure out how to teach people how to integrate and counter powerfully and permanently counter this fragmentation in a matter of weeks. Not that you will fully resolve the fragmentation, but that you will get on a solid path toward reconnecting these different parts, addressing the harm, being able to metabolize it, and move from strength to strength steadily and consistently, no matter what you are facing. Let's keep back with the core lesson here. And we're running low on time, so gotta keep going. All right, so and so then we have many different types of oppression. Hopefully the people who are listening aren't a super beginner. If you are, feel free to let me know you're a super beginner and I can do a repeat of this later where I really just go over the foundational basics. But I'm trying to straddle covering the basics and also adding in the 102, the 103, some of the 105 level content for people who know these basics but are missing some of these other foundational key insights about this material that can bring more insight that ripples throughout their leadership in really helpful and consequential ways. So the last two pieces I would love to cover here is you can find different lists online. Let me see if I can find one. Because I cite different sources I've used before for this specific resource, that's in part why I'm reluctant to share this specific resource, to be clear, because I've pulled some resources from other practitioners and I cite them, but I haven't gotten their permission to necessarily share this whole resource. So I'm weaving in a lot of my thought leadership and things like that and trying to be mindful of IP boundaries and the like. So I'm just gonna, well, anyway, you can just look up the list of different types of oppression and be wary, because if it says something like being mean to people or I don't know, something that doesn't seem legitimate, it might not be. But if it's around fat phobia, racism, sexism, xenophobia, let me just go through the list here really quickly that I have that is not comprehensive. Racism, classism, elitism, around educational level in terms educational level and place and hierarchy, sexism, transphobia, heterosexism, homophobia, religious oppression, meaning often Christians and Protestants, and particularly in the US, are privileged and or in the non-target group, and Muslims, Jews, Catholics, agnostics, Hindus, atheists, Buddhists, people who are spiritual, Latter-day Saints, Jehovah's Witness, pagans, can experience more or less degrees of targeting. Groups that don't have any Christian connection can experience substantially more targeting in terms of Muslims, Jews, Sikhs, et cetera, et cetera. Militarism, military status within the US. There are certain people who were connected to certain wars who are given more privilege and benefits over other veterans. Veterans who are veterans of World Wars I, II, and the Gulf War are often privileged over Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, and vets and pacifists. Ageism, adultism, ableism, xenophobia, and language oppression, linguistic oppression. So, so those are a number of oppressions, and then in each of those, there are different target and non-target groups. When I do this session with other people, I invite them to do an exercise that, which I can invite you to do now briefly, if that's all right. And let me see if I could briefly just, because the list is just a general list and I'd updated that. So, and also there's like framing that I provided that I don't want to give here, or I want to mention it briefly, but it can be confusing out of context. So let's see, how can I share? Never tried this before. Oh, it doesn't look like I can. I just want to do like a specific screen, but it seems like, let me check. Yeah, I can. That's fine. So I'll just share some of these. It feels like I don't like asking you to do a quick assignment here without giving you a little bit more resource. Okay. So this is not the full list, but here's an example of incomplete. Also, another form of oppression is fat phobia. Heavier people are extremely targeted and over time. So it's not necessarily as intergenerational, but they absolutely experience systemic oppression. So often I invite people to look at this list and notice the places where they are. Well, first off, notice the places where you are in the target versus non-target groups. And if you have any observations about that, you're welcome to share it in the chat or just process it on your own at your end. And then I invite people to take a few minutes. We don't have a ton of time now, and people can write it in the chat or you can reflect on it. The thing that I like to ask people to do is I want you to look over the list of the identities where you are in the target groups. And I want you to think about and perhaps list in the chat, either now in real time or with the replay that will temporarily be available for a few days before I move it into the Joyous Justice portal. Everybody be calling me. Boy. Is in terms of the places where you're in a target group, what are some of the strengths and assets that come from you being in that group, from you having that identity? Does that make sense? So what are some of the strengths and benefits that come from that? And also too, there's a little bit more. Okay, and here's the other part of that list. So it has longer stuff that I get into. And as you see, I have some blank spaces here where we can add additional forms of oppression because this list is far from exhaustive. Let me go back to y'all. Okay. So traditionally when I do this session, I go into the 4 levels of oppression, but I'm really going to get into that on Monday with a key insight that's helpful in the context of effective leadership and change, and something that I don't think a number of people realize. So we're moving toward closing for now. The last spicy piece that I wanted to share that we don't have time for, which is maybe for the best, is that a place where I think we need to agitationally or lovingly push ourselves, encourage ourselves, is to push ourselves to have a more holistic view of oppression and who's harmed by it and the work that is before us. And that is not to say, especially for specific groups, namely people of the global majority and women, but also other groups too, to be the caretakers of the target group. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about at the analytical and analysis level. That let me just cut to the chase. What I'm trying to avoid here, like for instance, I was on a is that how can we expand our awareness and our capacity? And it takes some real work. And again, that's part of what we cover in Grounded and Growing. And what undermines this capacity, which I haven't said what it is yet. So let me to hold space for the fact that different people who might be our oppressor in one way, that we are legitimately have an oppressor status for them in another. And it may not be as significant as the other dynamic, but it still matters. But it still matters if it's another form of systemic oppression. So, a classic example I always refer to, not usually in this context, in another, is when I had like some kind of staph infection in my toe. It was not fun. While I was in Senegal, I'd gotten typhoid my first few days there. I had to be on antibiotics for months. It decimated my microbiome. And as a result, I had a number of infections that followed in the months after as I painstakingly rebuilt my microbiome after getting over the typhoid, which by the way I did get a vaccine for, but didn't. Maybe it would have been worse than a 3-month bout of typhoid. God forbid. Anyway, let me not get distracted. The point is, I needed to go and I had this infection, and I went to see a male doctor at a clinic in Dakar. And he was so rude to me and so sexist. And it's, in a way, in retrospect, it's kind of funny because it was very clear to me as someone who's an intuitive that I clearly reminded him of an ex-girlfriend of his. It was like the way he was talking. Like one of the things we cover in Grounded and Growing is how human neurology works. It was like he was having a conversation with it. Like it didn't make any sense for a rando woman he just met for him to have this much bitterness and hurt in a very specific kind of way. But the thing is, oh, a spirit animal is outside my window. Hi, dove. Often my grandpa comes to me through doves. And it's looking right at me. It's turned, and it's very rare for birds to land on that perch. We're tight on time here. So, what am I trying to say here? Okay, it's still there. Okay. All right, I'm going to meditate later and see if there's a message in that. Anyway, so the point is, he was in an oppressor role. He was being so sexist to me and treating me horribly and telling me I needed surgery and that I had an ingrown toenail. And I was like, this is around the time of COVID. Like, I'm not wearing shoes in my house. I'm in the house all the time. It's not an ingrown toenail. And I was sick. He just wasn't listening to me. And he was so rude. And it was so upsetting and triggering for me and telling me that I needed to get cut into to address this and that he wasn't going to help me and he just wouldn't listen, and he was being really arrogant and like getting all chauvinistic, like I was trying to be controlling. Again, I wasn't. I was just being a thoughtful, self-respecting patient. And now if I had gone to, and sexism is a real thing, but also I was aware I wasn't going to go and report him. Like there might be some way in the future if I really wanted to pursue it, it was just worth it for me to just leave it behind. But I wasn't going to go to that clinic and report him because I was aware, as a light-skinned American, Senegalese people are pretty tough, but I was aware about the disproportionate power I had in that equation, which is part of why he was treating me that way. And that if I went and pursued that I could risk him losing his job, and that he needed to treat me better, but him losing his job and his livelihood was not a proportional consequence or intervention, reparative intervention, right? And so we're at time now, and so I need to kind of try to draw this to a close. But my point is that it would do us a world of good to start to hold more of this multiplicity and understand these moving parts. And that doesn't mean that there aren't certain things that need to be prioritized at a time.
like one thing at a time. We can't do all the things at once. Particularly, you can't necessarily have two active pains and points of suffering, which is often what's happening. So somebody needs to get resourced so they have attention, so that there can be a give and take, and actually there be room for transformation. That was what I was starting to say earlier about the Shema process, is because the energy piece, I've come to realize often people can't move because there's some kind of energetic work they need to do. And until they move that emotion or do that energy work, even if they know what to do, they're not going to be able to move it. It is a highly consequential variable, but that's going to be in a whole other live session. So sorry that this is ending a little abruptly. Um, and feel free, if there was a particular highlight or something you appreciated from the session, to share it in the chat in real time, or if you want to do it in the replay on YouTube or Facebook later, you're welcome to do that. And so all of this to say, if you aren't already on the Joyous Justice email list, you are welcome to sign up and join. There you'll be able to get access to our event calendar. I'm going to be going live every day next week at 11 a.m., Monday through Thursday. And I'm going to be building on this session, talking about the 4 levels of oppression, and then adding 2 really key, consequential, important insights related to working to transform those 4 levels of oppression that I've never heard anybody else talk about, and is really strategic and important. So I'm excited to continue to that and build from strength to strength. And shout out to anyone who had other commitments during this time and you're catching up over the weekend. I hope you really enjoyed these, and I look forward to picking up with you on Monday. So with that, I think I will draw to a close. There's one piece that I forgot. A little rushed. So I'm going to hang back and explain, like close some of these loops for just a couple more minutes. So if you can stay, that's great. If you're here in real time, and if you can't and you need to move on, that's totally okay. One of them, going back to that prompt that I gave you, that often, because people, when they learn about oppression, they always focus on the suffering of the oppressed, which is totally legit, but there's not as much emphasis on power. And so it's important to me when we talk about looking at non-target and target experiences, or oppressed and oppressor experiences, that we account for the immense power and strength and dignity that is almost always inherent in the experiences and lives and identities of the oppressed and targeted. And there's multiple places you can take that. If I'm working with a group, say around like race, and it's mostly a white group, I want white folks to notice this in the areas where they've been oppressed, so they can begin to understand more effective about how to work across lines more effectively, and notice for themselves around their own targeted identity, that they're never looking for handouts, that they want to be treated with dignity and respect. And to come from that place. And that also there's a ton of strength and brilliance, because in order to survive in the context of being targeted for destruction and dehumanization, the strength and resilience, which never justifies the oppression, but the amount of strength and beauty and cultural radiance and courage that is there is immense. And it's often what people in the non-target group do not have. So that's a whole other thing we could get into, and I would love to do maybe like a Zoom call at some point and actually talk about this, because that is also part of what keeps us kind of stuck, is because these groups are privileged in other ways, but their muscles and abilities and talents and connection is largely atrophied, and they are not well positioned for the courageous work that they and all of us from multiple angles need to engage in. So we'll talk about this more, but my understanding is we get to choose which parts we play, but there's so much that needs to be fixed in the context of systemic oppression if we are going to survive as a species on a planet, that all of us have work to do in this. And that's not for people in non-target groups or oppressor groups to tell people in oppressed groups. That's not what I'm saying. But for us who are in those groups to recognize, and I'm going to get more into this on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday in ways that I think will hopefully feel dignifying and like, oh yeah, I can F with that. Like, that makes sense. and engage in that. So you are so welcome, Dean. It was such a joy and honor to have you here. And thank you so much for joining us. So I think that's a good place to end for now. Hopefully, this was quite helpful. If you have other questions, feel free to write in the comments wherever this video eventually ends up, and we can circle back to it either with me directly and or with other people in the community. Much love. Take good care. Juma Mubarak. Shabbat Shalom. Happy weekend. Happy any other sacred time for those for whom it is relevant. And much love and more soon. We are going to get into it on Monday. I'm going to put my foot in it. Get ready, y'all. All right. Much love and more soon. Bye-bye.